Hello again. So, as you can tell by the title, in this video I'm going to be putting together a little box of scatter terrain that's, well, fairly useful in its own right, but the main aim, at least for myself, is to have a little travelling GM's kit almost. You know, like if I want to take something with me to a friend's house to play, or a local game store, or maybe even a convention sometime in the future perhaps, but yeah, just something that's pretty compact that can kind of live in the bottom of a backpack, or in the car's glove compartment, or something like that. Now, obviously, I'm not going to sit here and claim that the things that I've included are the only things you'll ever need, or that it's the ultimate travelling GM's kit or anything like that, as, you know, the stuff I consider fairly essential, you might think is pretty useless, and vice versa. So, it's very much just a matter of what I personally think at this moment in time, and I'm only really covering things that you might find in a fairly stereotypical dungeon. And because this is something I want to keep as compact as possible, I'm not going to be making any of the dungeon tiles for this. Instead, I'll just be using some kind of erasable battle mat. And I think the basic Pathfinder flip mat is a good choice for something like this, as it takes up no space at all, and you can just slot it into your GM's folder. Though, you could also use a roll-up mat if you prefer. Anyway, if you're going to do something like this yourself, you're going to need a little compartmentalised box, and if you're in the UK, you can currently get this one for £2.50, I think it was, from Poundland. And it's pretty compact, it's around 5 inches by 8 inches, so around half the size of a sheet of paper, and the nice thing about it is that it's also double-sided. So if I open it up, you can see that there's a large compartment at the top that's half the depth of the entire box, and at the front it has one deep compartment and 3 shallow compartments, and obviously that's reversed on the other side. Actually, if I turn the box on its side, you can see how the deep compartment on the one side corresponds to the shallow compartments on the other. So yeah, that's the box that I'll be using, but you could use whatever you like. Okay, so what I think is probably the most important thing to have is a couple of doors. And here I've just made a standard wooden door, and given it a clear base that will fit inside that long compartment on the right hand side. And it doesn't really matter how many you make, you'll probably find that you never have quite enough, but I've gone ahead and made half a dozen of them. But the compartment itself, it's actually big enough to hold 8 doors if I wanted it to, so I've also made a couple of portcullises, as these can also be used to represent iron bars, or rusty gates, or even some kind of jail cell. Okay then, so moving on, if there's going to be any large chambers in the dungeon, it's a good idea to include a few pillars to support the roof, like this one here, and as it happens, these will fit nicely inside one of those deeper compartments. Now, the next most important thing, well, in my opinion at least, are little bits of scatter terrain, like the crates that you can see here, but this also includes things like barrels and chests, and maybe even little piles of sacks, yeah, something like that. However, while I think these rate quite high on the list of things to make, I'd actually recommend leaving these until last, because as you can see, rather than having them as individual pieces, we can glue them together into little clusters, and if we wait and see what space we have left in our box at the end of the project, we can then kind of glue them into a shape that will fit whatever size hole we're trying to fill, if that makes sense. So, for now, I'll put those to one side. Right then, next on the list is a stone table. And if you make it so it looks something like this, it can also work as an altar or a sarcophagus, you know, things like that. And this next part, it really isn't necessary. I just went a little bit overboard when putting my own terrain kit together. But with this box that I'm using, these shallow compartments here, they really aren't all that useful, because even something as low as this small table, it's still too tall to fit inside. So what I've done is I've made the kind of decorative slab that sits on top of the table, I've made that as a separate piece, with a little slot to anchor it in place. Hopefully you can see the kind of thing that I mean. And the benefit of this is that I can now make a few separate, I don't know, toppers shall we call them, like one with a mummy lying on top, which I'll quickly slot into place, and now we have something that looks like this instead. And I have done that with a few other things as well. So here's a piece to convert it into that kind of classic stone tomb that we all know and love. And coming up in a second, here's one where there's a body with a burial shroud draped over the top, though in this instance the white cloth replaces the stone slab that I used in the previous examples. And here's another one with a few other bits and pieces glued into place. And yeah, I have made duplicates of most of these. So there you go. And one of the nice things about these toppers is that they're small enough to fit inside those shallow compartments that I just mentioned. Some of them can even be stacked 2 or 3 high. So here I am doing that and putting the main tables next to the pillars. Then I can flip the box over and add the rest. And as a bit of an unexpected bonus, these shallow compartments, which I first thought of as a bit of a drawback to be honest, they've actually made me think, well, I was going to say made me think outside the box, but technically it's inside the box. But yeah, what I'm trying to say is that it's actually allowed me to have even more variety than I originally planned. Though, as I say, I have gone a little bit overboard with these, and if you're making your own travel kit, then you could totally skip this part and just make the stone table thing. I just wanted to try and fill as much of this box as possible. Anyway, as well as the stone tables, I think it's also a good idea to have a few wooden tables as well, like this one that you can see here. And again, I've made 2 of these, which I'll just put straight into the box as there's not really much more to say about those. Okay then, another thing I find really useful to have is a statue of some kind. And I wasn't really planning on doing this, but because the stone table worked out really well, I've done a similar thing with the little plinth that it's standing on. So here's another version with a gargoyle on top, and as I say, it's the exact same thing that we did with the stone tables, and as you'll see in a second, here's one with a basic lever mechanism, which might also prove useful. And as well as those, here's another one with some kind of puzzle device. If you check out episode 62, there's actually a player handout that works really well with this one. And finally, I've made a couple of empty tops as well. Then all we'll need to do is find space for these in the box. And most of these toppers, they can go in the shallow compartments with the tabletops. And I'll just rest the statue and gargoyle in here for now. And the little plinth things, they'll fit nicely in between the 2 pillars. And the puzzle can go in the top. Okay, one of the last things that I wanted to add to this set was some rubble. And I probably should have mentioned this earlier, but the stuff I'm using for the clear bases on some of this stuff, it's just that packaging that miniatures sometimes come in. Anyway, as you can see, I've made one large pile of rubble and one smaller pile as well. And these are useful for ruined parts of the dungeon, or areas that are still under construction, or part of a trap or whatever. And the big one, that can go in the other deeper compartment, and the smaller one, that fits in alongside the tables. So yeah, if you ignore all of the parts where I got a little bit carried away, shall we say, then the main things I really wanted to make sure that I had was several doors, a few pillars, a bunch of crates, barrels, sacks, that kind of thing, a stone altar or sarcophagus, a couple of wooden tables, a statue, and a bit of rubble. And as I've already said, I have gone a bit overboard with all of those convertible pieces, just to make use of those shallow compartments, and because I like to overcomplicate things, it seems. But yeah, anything else I'm going to make from here on, I'm really just making to fill up the rest of the box, though I still want that stuff to be pretty generic and fairly useful. So with that in mind, I thought a good addition would be a well, as whoever built the dungeon is going to need a water source, plus you could also proxy it as a small pool, or a fountain if you really needed to. Next we have some shelves, though a cupboard or a set of drawers would also work, just something to spice up a room and give the characters something to rummage through. A fancy chair or a throne is a nice addition, you know, just something for the big boss to sit on. And because when I was building all of these I was making them to fill specific areas, I already have a few spaces in mind for them. For example, there's a bit of space here above the knight effigies, so I've gone ahead and made a brazier that fits nicely into that gap, and I've made one for each compartment, so there you go. Okay, so finally, I thought it would also be a good idea to have somewhere for the dungeon denizens to sleep. So, nothing fancy, again, just something to add a bit of interest to a room, and to inform the players that they might have just stumbled into some kind of lair or den. And these can fill out another of those small compartments. And speaking of filling out compartments, now it's time to add all of the crates and barrels and sacks and so on. And like I said earlier, I did leave this step until last, you know, so that I could then glue them into various configurations that would fit into the spaces that I had left, though I did make sure that I left plenty of room in one of the deeper compartments to fit in a few larger pieces. And that piece that you can see on top of the wooden tables, that's just the right height to press against the top of the lid when it's closed, and that stops the tables from sliding around and helps prevent the legs from getting broken. So there you go, there's my finished travel terrain set, or whatever you want to call it, and I think I've succeeded in managing to pack quite a lot of terrain into such a small space. Though, if you do make something like this yourself, you might find that you're forever tinkering and trying to optimise the available space, like I'm doing here. And as you can see, I've now got another empty section. So I did show this to some friends and asked them for ideas for what they think I should put in there, and a few bone piles was one of the suggestions. But yeah, is there anything that you think I've missed, or anything that you'd swap out or make more of or less of, you know, if you were doing something similar yourself? I think I've got most of the basics covered, but input's always appreciated. Anyway, here's a better picture of everything that fits inside this box, and if you're new here, then I have tutorials showing how to make all of this stuff here on the channel, and it's just made by gluing paper printouts to bits of card and things like that. It's all fairly straightforward stuff. So all that's left to say is thank you very much for watching. I hope you found some of these ideas useful. If you did, maybe you could consider giving the video a like and all that other YouTube nonsense. But yeah, thanks again, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye for now.